This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
And on WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, welcome to Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And it's a beautiful Friday morning. It's gorgeous out there. We call this Chamber of Commerce weather, and it is. And we're sandwiched today between Pi Day and St. Patty's Day, right, for all the Irish. And I'm being ecumenical. I'm wearing both green and orange. So, yeah, that way we support both the Protestants and the Catholics. And, of course, that's a wonderful study in how people can make peace.
Yes.
Who were violently feuding. And there's lessons to be learned there. Peace can be made. In fact, peace is never made between friends. Peace is always something you make and need, and it's made between enemies. And I think that's part of the lesson of this time of year. So for Jews, we're coming up on the festival of Purim, which is connected with the book of Esther. And I think it's an interesting piece. I'm having a small war here. Okay, we'll figure this out. We'll figure it out. It got wrapped around. You want the headset there?
We'll figure
Roll
this
back,
out.
okay.
Yeah,
There we go. Okay. Yeah, somehow that chair got married to all of the wires under there and needed a small divorce.
Effective, okay.
Yeah, there we go. But anyways, I started to say we're coming up on Purim. Purim is actually next weekend, and that is the celebration of the victory of Esther and Mordecai and the Jews over Haman and his group that wanted to steal their property and hang them. Yeah.
That sounds difficult.
Yeah,
to,
it's an ongoing theme. Yeah, that one was not peaceful. And that actually is the biggest issue, if you will, with the book of Esther, which is that's a war that's settled by obliterating the enemy. And that's not real. That's just not real. It doesn't happen in real life. Ethnic cleansing has never worked. If we look through history, it never works. It's damaging. And I believe that in the end, it really, really hurts whatever country attempts it. I think that Germany paid a big price for the Holocaust, and other groups, Kosovo. We can look all over the world. Bosnia. There are many hot spots. In fact, there are 9 active ones today. If you look it up, we just don't hear about them. We don't hear about them because they're not here in the U.S. and they don't affect what I would call U.S. type countries. And by that I mean countries that we have an interest in. And
we hear a lot about one or two conflicts.
One or two, right. So we hear a little bit about Ukraine and Russia because we care a little bit about what happens there. Not a lot. And it's really faded from the news. Which is really tragic because it's been going on far too long. And nobody's super criticizing anybody. There's a little bit of polite, oh, that's not nice. And people are being killed and property destroyed. And innocents are definitely paying a price.
Well, it seemed like there was a lot of interest in Ukraine, and then the Middle East.
Yeah,
became much more heated.
Yeah,
you kind of lost interest and
right. It overshadowed it.
Only so much you can focus on. Yeah.
Well, there's that too, and the famous "how long does a news cycle last?"
Yes.
Right, which is a nice way of saying how long will the American public stay interested.
Attention span.
Yeah. That's an attention span issue. And I saw an interesting post not long ago that said, wouldn't it be great if our kids knew the names of plants and animals instead of the names of celebrities?
Yes. Let's see if there's a TikTok for plants and animals.
Yeah.
Sure.
And well, there are. They just don't pull the same kind of. There's something about the American culture, and it's not just the American culture, but something about humans being attracted to celebrities. There's something about that splash that, yeah, and we see that even reflected in, say, video games, right? Because video games are splashy. They catch your attention. They're designed to have that frame change, splash color, da 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 da, and they go out of their way to make sure that people, especially kids, are in fact attentive to it.
Well, the whole idea that on TikTok now you can make a living as an influencer.
Yeah.
And there are quite a number of people apparently who are doing that. Not something I understand, but I was amazed at the numbers of people who are doing it.
And of course, the other question then becomes, how good a living are they making? Right. You know, are they making just a couple of dollars and calling that a living versus are they really making a living? And in order to really make, I mean, I'm actually right now making a few YouTube videos of the paintings that I do because people have asked me to. And what I'm discovering is that that's actually slowing down my painting, which is kind of interesting because now I have to fuss with getting the camera set up and getting the computer set up to capture it. Then I have to go back in and edit it because I'm far from perfect, even though I do live radio. There's something about when you're going to put it on YouTube forever, and I know that Ask a Rabbi is on YouTube forever, so all of my wonderful mistakes on the show are there for glorious eternity, or whatever the life of a YouTube video is, which is far from eternity, but it'll show up at the weirdest times down the road. I get that. I've lived with live broadcasts so long that I know that it's out there and people can find all the things you don't want them to find somewhere down the road, like today when I forgot my glasses. So
yeah, it used to be that, hey, it's live, it's keep going.
Yeah.
It's past.
Yeah, but
now there's a record.
yeah, now there's a record, right? Yeah, and that's so true. And I know that you're you, like me, are of a vintage that you can remember when people would do pranks like light the script on fire and other assorted games in the studio to see if whether or not you could stay unflapped.
Yeah, I never saw that, but yes, there are some things that happen.
Actually, the trick that people used to do in our little college radio station, they would crawl under the desk that you're on, which had, in those days, it had 4 turntables. We were huge, 4 turntables in our little station, and people would crawl underneath and they'd grab it, while you were talking. So it was how good were you at ad lib in the moment, and did you really remember who you had queued up on which one? Back in the days of queuing, instead of just hit the button and let it play.
Yes.
Yeah, electronics have made it a whole lot easier. The board's a lot smaller.
Well, yes, and there's not as much going on. That's
Yeah.
That's live. A lot of it's pre-programmed.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, a lot more because you can edit it. And a lot more of it's remote because of that. And we are truly living in a different culture. I think that kids, it would be interesting to see how they would react if they found out what it was really like back in the day when you had to go to the studio or you had to go out on the set in order for things to happen.
We have a group coming through next week that is part of an occupational camp for students with certain challenges to come through and see what jobs there are in different settings. And I was looking around thinking, there used to be much more that would be available to teenagers and looking at a career. And how much does this change from what is available now? I mean, that's,
right, they've got to be able to be tech savvy.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
and what we're really seeing is a generation that's tech dependent, but not tech savvy. The boomers are really the tech savvy ones. They're the ones who created and know how to fix the electronics. We're actually raising a generation that's not as good at fixing. And
you just buy new?
they buy, yeah.
Just buy new?
It has definitely increased. I was thinking about that in terms of a lot of things. I was actually thinking about it this morning in terms of clothing. We're seeing clothing that doesn't hold up anywhere near as well as the garments when I still have garments from when I was in high school that are in reasonable repair. They don't look dingy. They don't look horrible. They're still comfortable. As long as you wash them often, they stay soft. And I look at the stuff now and I know that it's not going to last. And that's not by accident, that's by intention. Because if you have clothing that lasts, you don't buy as
You
much.
can't sell as much. You're right.
Right? You don't need, I don't need basic t-shirts because I still have all of the colors that I had from years ago. And I've just added here and there where there's been a need, but for the most part, no. And part of that, candidly, was that one of my habits is always that you get to play dress the rabbi when you have a life event. You get to tell me what color to wear, and I will match your color scheme. So
Okay.
very
I
often
didn't
that,
realize.
yeah, it's because of the way women dress. It was one of the things that I could do, is because I didn't want to stand out in any pictures and be wearing, hot pink if everybody else is in pale gray. Or
Yeah.
wear,
Yeah,
or
that's the
wear,
rabbi, right.
or wear orange when they're wearing red. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just not going to work. So I always said, tell me your color palette, give me a swatch, and I'll match it. And I've always done that. So I've got that wardrobe that's matched all the colors of weddings and B'nai Mitzvah and things like that. And that's been fun. I've had to buy less and less the longer I've been a rabbi.
And that's a nice touch, though.
Well, I think it's important.
Yeah.
I think and people notice it. They'll say, "Oh, the rabbi matches your color scheme," and they'll figure out, "Oh, well, that was intentional." And that's always been one of my small things. It just makes the pictures of the actual wedding look better, because there you have, the bridesmaids and their colors, and sometimes you can see it on the groomsmen, and there's the rabbi in the picture because the wedding's ongoing, and it's nice if it fits. It looks better. So one of the small things, and life is made of small things. So back to Purim, which was the main topic of today. And Purim is always in spring. It's usually Passover and Easter are kind of co-located because they're both tied to the vernal equinox. They're both spring holidays. But this is a Jewish leap year, which pushes Purim a month later. So this year, the festival of Esther, Purim, is overlapping Easter, which I think historically may have well led to some animosity between Christians and Jews. And that's because it's a raucous carnival kind of holiday, which, again, just like orange and red might not fit at a wedding, raucous and somber don't mix well. When you're running around, and part of the instruction for Purim, it's not only to be joyful, but in fact to be so drunk that you can't tell the difference between curse and praise. And that's pretty drunk, folks. It's that part of the holiday. I don't need to get drunk to get that joyous, and I prefer to remember it.
Now, this is in the old days, or that tradition?
It's still in Israel. There'll be a group that'll be fall down drunk, and because that's one of the instructions. You're supposed to get that happy, and it's not just about getting drunk, although for some people it clearly will be, but it's to be joyful and to let go of the troubles of the world and realize that most of the things that we fight about are really pretty petty. If we cared about each other enough, then there'd be a lot less dispute in the world. If we had more compassion and more empathy, there'd be less conflict in the world. And it's so my answer to people who say, well, if they loved their children more than they hate us, there would be peace. And I'll flip that and say, when we love our children more than we hate them, there'll be peace.
Is it Golda Meir?
Yeah, it was Golda Meir who said that. And
I love that.
And I love that phrase.
Yes.
But it also needs to flip, because it takes two to make peace, and it takes two to make war. Sorry about that, folks. It just does. And when you engage in war and you weren't the aggressor, they are bringing you to their level. Right.
So what should be the alternative?
I don't have all the answers, and I haven't been asked other than by you. So thank you.
Okay, sorry.
But no, I think it's something that requires significant effort. I think it requires, to make peace in Germany took the international community. Everybody had to, yes, there was a carving up that went on, and there were things that maybe weren't perfect, but in the end, outside of the wall, which I think was an attempt of somebody clearly to power grab and do some colonialism. But I think when the goal is really helping a country and a people have peace, then you do it. You do it by investing. You do it by bringing something into the country so that people can have some sense of self-esteem. The way that we make peace is by giving people self-esteem, helping them build that self-esteem. You can't give it, but you can help people build it. And I think that's because if somebody's got nothing to lose, they've got nothing to lose, folks.
Except a lot of people.
Well, a lot of people, and so, but the situation in the Middle East has gotten to a place where I think the Gazans expect to lose everything, and so they really have nothing to lose, and they become absolute pawns in this game. I'm not saying that Hamas is a pawn. Hamas is not. Hamas is definitely the string puller. So, and I'm not belittling the horrific things, but there are ways to bring people to justice, and we need to get more creative. We need to be more empathetic. We need to recognize what it really does do to make it. It's not about being right. It's about doing right. And that's a difficult switch. And you might say, well, you're not in the heat of the moment. Well, yes, I am. I've got family there. And I've got friends throughout the area. I've got family that's not all that far, that have been going to funerals. I have friends here in the US who have lost family members. Anyway, it's a situation that the world needs to care about. We need to, as a world, get rid of terrorism and make it non-viable. Just as we're fighting bullying in schools, we need to fight bullying on the world stage. And the only thing that a bully needs is for the rest of the group to say nothing, because the bully takes that as tacit approval, as encouragement to go on. It's like, nobody's stopping me. They must be okay with what I'm doing. It's not good logic, but it's what bullies do, because they're geared to looking at it. If nobody's stopping me, then what I'm doing is okay. In fact, maybe they really want me to do it. That's why they're quiet and letting me do it. They agree with me. And we certainly see Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. We see a lot of isms and hate. And haters are going to hate, but we need to make that less palatable as a culture. We need to be less divisive. And I think that we've just become so divisive in the last so many years that we're creating the breeding ground for hatred. When we start calling each other names and devolving into those, to below the little rascals, right? When we get into that level, when we become parts of gangs, then we lose part of our humanity and become just something. And I think that's tragic, because we are all humans. And that's an important piece. One human is not worth more than another human, period. End of statement. And I often talk to my classes about it all the time. We compare European penal systems where it's not about punishment, it's about rehabilitation. And they have much lower crime rates and much lower recidivism and much smaller prison populations. We have an overwhelming percentage of the world's incarcerated population. And by that, what I mean, folks, is we have more people in jail per capita than I think any other country. And we're in the league with Iran, Iraq, China. That's not a group I want to be in. It's just not a group that I think that America should be in. And part of the problem is that we've privatized prisons. And so people are making a profit out of warehousing people. And a lot of people look at incarcerated individuals as throwaway people. And again, that's dehumanizing. It's devaluing. It's making them less than who and what they are. Do they need help? Absolutely. Some of them definitely have some mental health issues. They need to be addressed from a mental health standpoint, not from a punish them because of their illness. And that's a really sad comment on our society, that we punish people for the behaviors they do when they're ill because of their mental illness. Just because we can't see it, we can see the limp. When somebody breaks a leg, we can see the limp. We can see the broken bone. But when somebody has a mental illness, it's not as easy to see. Some of them are. Some of them are starting to see on MRIs and things like that. And sometimes we can fix and sometimes we can't. But we need to treat people for what they need. We need to fix what we can fix. We need to adjust what we can adjust. And we need to make life livable for people.
Yet for so many people running for election, the tough on crime is the stance that is popular.
It's popular because people, we've got to get off of fear, right? That's a fear plank, right? Oh, there's lots of hoodlums. And in fact, that's part of how Hitler came to power, was using fear of uprising and rebellion, right? The Reichstag incidents and the burnings and the looting and all of that, and blaming the Jews for it, when in fact it was Hitler's own gang that did it. And people want to blame somebody, especially somebody they think they can overpower, even if it's not the right person. That's just part of the illogic of crowdthink. Crowds are easier to control than individuals, because when crowdthink takes in, especially, and fear is good for crowdthink. And we've seen it used all over the world in elections that are theoretically free, but they're not free of manipulation, certainly not at a psychological level. And we know that there are people who groom people there are abusers in the world, and they groom their victims. And we as a society are also groomed to accept it. I'll give you I'll flip a thing. Trafficking, big issue in Florida. We are the number 3 trafficked state in the US. California and Texas, probably more about population than anything else, but also it's the way that Florida has tourism. And that's also true for California. Tourism makes it easier to turn a blind eye when you see people going through and being trafficked. The I-10 is a major corridor for slaves all over the country. It's an highway. It's an easy place to move people.
And we don't see it. We don't
want to see it.
We don't think it's going on right around us.
It's going on right here in Port Saint Lucie, Fort Pierce, the Treasure Coast. It's happening. It just is.
Yeah, there are some local groups who try to pinpoint that. There's a theater group in Fort Pierce that does.
There's a few groups, yeah. They prey on kids, and what we're seeing now is they're starting to find their victims through social media. And that's a really scary thing, because so many kids are so hooked into social media that even gaming, that what we see as perpetrators who will take up to 2 years to groom their victims, to come and meet them and run away. And that gets back down into a family dynamic of who's at high risk. And they'll cut across the social. It's not just the low level kids, the poor kids. It's richer kids. It's anybody that a a pimp thinks could be useful. And it's a commodity to them, and they're just farming. So they'll do over and over again. It doesn't take that long to interact with a few kids on the internet. If you get a few of them, somebody can make a ton of money from body snatching and grabbing people. It's not kidnapping. It's getting these people to actually come to them and then be controlled. And it's a psychological control. It's not just a drug addiction, although drug addiction sometimes play into it. And we see that trafficking going on. If you see somebody who isn't in control of themselves, if they don't, if somebody else is calling the shots for them, even when they're out, then they're probably being controlled.
Now, Florida has passed a law. There's been a lot of skepticism about how it'll be enforced, but regulating young people on the internet and on different sites.
Yeah, and that is going to be a challenge, because the kids will circumvent things just because they're kids. But here's a real issue that we have. Okay, we have victims who are being trafficked for sex. When they do a raid on a brothel, the victims go to jail because they've committed the crime, but the Johns who bought their services go home. And the pimps don't get.
Communities who've tried to publicize you.
Yeah, and the pimps don't get caught because the victims are afraid to say anything. So society is really perpetuating that victimhood in the way that we do it. We need to make it illegal to buy sex, not to sell it, but to buy it. We need to make it illegal to buy people for labor. Not all slaves are trafficked for sex.
Aren't there laws against
There are laws against slavery, yes,
yeah,
but they're not well enforced. And again, victims are, I mean, that's the point of being a victim. They don't have the power cards. And I'm going to flip it back to Gaza. It's the same thing. The Gazans are being held by Hamas. They're not voluntarily in this system. And a victim can't turn on the perpetrator, both emotionally and out of fear. That same fear. Hamas will kill a Gazan just as easily as they will an Israeli. They'll rape, and where can a Gazan go for help? Israel's not going to help them.
Right, they have two threats.
They have two threats.
Yeah.
They have absolutely two threats. And nowhere to turn. Nobody cares about them. That's why they have nothing to lose. The Hamas doesn't care about them. Israel doesn't care about them. They are truly stuck in the middle. They are cannon fodder. And that's just not a good place to be. You got nothing to lose.
When you have the international community starting to say, look, you at least have to, get medical, you have to get food, you have to.
And we're starting to see that. But candidly, it's way late in the.
It is late.
It is very late. And if companies had invested in putting, we put high-tech manufacturing firms in companies, granted they're peaceful, that don't have high-skilled labor. We can do that in Gaza too. They could be making chips just as easily as Malaysia. And especially when you've got a population as young as the population in Gaza, where the average age is 18. Hello. Right, you're not dealing with an old population, because it's very hard to survive in that environment, and constant warfare is not helping either. So, and Hamas is not. They're not in Gaza. They're running Gaza, but many of their leaders are in Lebanon and in Qatar and surrounding areas, and just running it somewhat remotely, sucking off the money and living like kings where they are, at the expense of the Gazans, who never get most of the aid that's sent to them. It's siphoned off. Just as we saw when fuel was being given to try to help the Gazans, a good chunk of that went to Hamas. And that's not even talking about the suitcases of cash that came into Gaza, that I'm sure a chunk of it got siphoned off so that their leaders, Hamas's leaders, could live well outside of Gaza. We don't begin to know the real story. And you have to really pay attention to multiple sources to try to figure out the pieces. And I have not done as thorough a job as perhaps I might want to, as I have in times past. I've been a little distracted with my studies and everything else that I'm doing. But as much as I see, I know that the story is well beyond just that 150 square mile piece of land. And there's still supplies coming in. There's still rocket fire, folks. And Hezbollah is joined, right, with rocket fire out of the north. We still tolerate terrorist organizations as a planet. That means we're allowing bullies to circumvent what we would consider common decency, to create terror and thereby control people. Bullies control through fear. And they control through kind of a Stockholm syndrome kind of a thing. There's a, oh, I'm so proud of you that you withstood blah, 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 right? So they both feed the fear and the need for belonging and the need for self-esteem. But the need for self-esteem is a huge, undeniable human need. We need to belong. We need to have an identity. And when we're fed hate as part of that identity, then we are condemning our children to violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, that gets back to the Golda Meir. You have to love your children more than you hate each other. Yes.
And that has to do with how we teach our children to treat others. Mm-hmm. If we treat our children that certain groups are just going to rob, cheat, steal, etc., then yeah, we're setting our kids up. That's not protecting them. There is an element of, yeah, you don't leave your doors unlocked at night. I get that. But, lock your car is the Saint Lucie police is trying to promote right now because there are far too many car thefts going on. So there's an element of, let's not make it easy for you to be a victim.
Sure.
Right. So there's some self-awareness and safety. Put on your seatbelt, folks, kind of stuff that you need to do, but don't think that everybody's going to ram into your car.
True. Yeah.
Right.
You do the basics, and then
yeah, and then you have to live.
Yes.
We have to love life more than we hate.
But you also have to have an environment. I look at the video of Gaza now and think, how are people even surviving?
Well, the part that gets me is that there are sections that are really not all that touched, which just blew me away. Right. The scenes of people leaving the Rafah crossing. That plaza is gorgeous. It's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. So we know there's, at least there were, I haven't looked at videos very recently, sections that are still not touched, which is interesting. Okay. And so we probably have homeless people living in those alleyways, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's all different kinds of stuff going on.
And the destruction, the buildings have been imploded, and maybe we don't see the areas that are left untouched.
Yeah. One of my listeners here is talking about the red buttons that people are wearing now. And
the Academy Awards, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not an easy situation, and nobody has asked me outside of a radio show of talking what I would suggest and what I do and how I would and all of that stuff. And I don't know that I want to be on that committee, candidly, because I don't think it's easy answers. But I think that people who have skill we have people on the planet who have skill in making peace in troubled places. And I think back to something, there's a video that 60 Minutes did on the German prisons. And you can Google it, and anybody can. German prison 60 Minutes. It's a 60-minute rewind little group. And one of the lines in there that really struck me is from the warden of one of the prisons in Germany. And he said, the function of the guards is calm down, calm down, calm down. Don't go to the violent attempt at a solution, because it doesn't work. Calm down. Right? When we make peace, we're calm. Right? And there's an old saying, right? Convince a person against their will, and they're of the same opinion still. So beating somebody into submission is not winning.
No.
It's overpowering, but it's not winning. You win when you make peace. You win when you both come away from the table with more than you came to it. And that's possible. It's not, and I use the example, and I know it's a classic example, of when two people want one orange. One of them wants the skin of the orange for zest. The other wants the juice for their recipe. They can both get what they need from a single orange, but not if you cut it in half. So it's not about compromise. It's about addressing the real needs, and you only do that when you sit down and talk. You don't get it while you're clubbing each other over the head for that one orange sitting on the shelf. And there are ways to win. There just are. There are win-win solutions to almost every problem. And I teach a class right now on interpersonal conflict at Kaiser. And that's part of the point of it, is that it's very difficult to make peace between two warring factions. And in fact, scripture says, blessed is the one who makes peace between combatants. Yeah. Between somebody and their neighbor, because we fight with our neighbors, right? Is the property line here? Is it there? Is your tree overhanging mine? Is it this? Is it that? And there are aggressive ways to do that escalate. And there are collaborative ways of doing that don't escalate and find solutions. And the big piece in that is to treat other human beings with dignity, to treat them as if they are, in fact, what they are, which is human beings. When we call somebody else a dog or a pig or a baboon or anything, we are dehumanizing them. We are making them less than human, and we do that to justify immoral behavior. So listen, folks, when you call somebody names, you are attempting to take their humanity away. And I'll go, and that includes when somebody calls somebody else a snowflake or any of those wonderful terms that we heard. Sure. Right, that's an attempt at dehumanizing the enemy. And if we humanize one another, then we can sit down at the table and have a meaningful discussion. But if somebody's a nothing, they can't sit down at the table with you. Mm-hmm. So we're preventing.
And your opinion is superior.
Yeah. Simply because you think it is, when in fact, And I don't care how many degrees I have, I still have so much to learn. In fact, that's if you will, the hallmark of somebody who's smarter, is they realize how much they don't know. There's a reason why I'm studying for exams, because I don't know everything and I still have so much to learn. There's much more to learn on the planet than I'll ever learn, but I need to learn enough to be effective in the things that I do. And when we do that, when we step back and recognize that the person sitting across the table has as much to offer as we do, then we need to become intellectually and emotionally curious about what they have to offer. And then we can value what they put on the table. And then we can expect that what we put on the table will be recognized and honored and respected as well. And that's not just being Pollyanna and dreamy. That works. That is how negotiation works.
Yes, it has.
It has. There's a lot of precedents. This is not something. This is not something coming out of my head. This is something coming out of evidence-based research. That there's long-standing. This works. It's how peace has been made in warring areas, and it can be done. And somebody bigger than the combatants needs to step in, overstep the bounds, step in and make peace. Because the combatants need to be sat down in a room and said, you don't come out until you figure this out and work it out.
Now, who can do that? We've had a couple of people who have been
yeah, well, that's part of the challenge, right? Because then you don't want to fight over who's going to stop the fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fear is that what goes on, first of all, a war in the Middle East, and I've said this other times, is a very valuable field lab for armaments. Who cares if they're fighting? They're testing rockets, they're testing ammunition, they're testing weaponry, they're testing surveillance, they're testing, they're a field lab for arms manufacturers, as is the war in the Ukraine. So these hotspots are fed. They're encouraged because it keeps it away. Yes, that's very cynical.
Yeah, we don't like to think of it that way. Yeah,
I understand that.
Yeah,
it's not a pleasant thought. But, yeah, as one of my watchers here said, leaders are mercenaries. Right? They get their leadership. And, you can say that we didn't know that Pearl Harbor was coming, but we knew something was. And the US was going out of its way to provoke Japan to get into the war. We know that historically now when we look back. And the things that America did in the name of the war with Japan are also beyond conscionable. They're unconscionable. The internment and detainment of Japanese people, or not Japanese people, Americans of Japanese descent, is just, doesn't honor any law. But that again was a fear-based behavior, and it has led to serious discrimination that still continues. We can trace some of the discrimination into that fear that was fed and propagated. And I don't blame the media, but the media is the handmaiden, if you will, gets used. And there are so many perfect storms in the world of people who get used and abused along the way to create these scenarios where human beings suffer, human beings pay a price, and the human beings who do are discardable people. And yeah, it doesn't feel good. It's unpalatable to think about that, but it's what we're doing. When we think that it's okay for certain people to suffer, we're being less than human ourselves. And you don't have to lower yourself to bring somebody else up. There's enough resources on the planet that we could bring up people to the place where warfare isn't necessary, but it's not going to feed greed. When Arafat got rid of Black September, the terrorist group, as part of the peace deal, what he did is he married them off. He gave them families and jobs and a house and a car. He gave them something to live for.
So then do they assimilate then?
Yeah, then they assimilated and just stopped being terrorists because now they had something to lose. Okay.
But it took a strong leader among Palestinians.
Yeah, it took a leader who was willing to stop that game in order to have peace. And I think that having peace is going to involve and necessitate putting industry and viable jobs not only in Gaza, but in southern Israel too. Right. They have it's mostly farming area, and it's also not a highly educated part of Israel. And we see that education and peacemaking tend to go together, which is one of the reasons why people who don't want peace attack education in the early parts of their campaigns. Because if you can shut up the people who know what's going on and make them powerless to, right, you devalue what they have to offer, then we start not learning from history. And we give bullies the upper hand. And it's gang warfare and bullying, and that's what's going on in the world. And it can be addressed. It does not have to continue. It probably will, but it doesn't have to. And until we as a species address some of these issues, it's going to continue. We clearly need to do that. We need to start addressing what are the big issues. We need to take that German prison attitude of how do we calm down? How do we create peace? How do we make peace? We don't make peace with our friends. We've already got peace with them. Okay? And that's a hard thing. Imagine making peace with the people you don't like.
And both sides need to.
Both sides need to do it. Both sides need to be pretty much at a level ground, or it's not going to hold. And there's some face saving that's involved in here, image stuff. There's all kinds of things, and it's going to take some people who really want peace to make it happen. And there are people on both sides who absolutely don't want peace. There are people on the right and on the left who don't want peace. There's what I call the militant left as well. They're just as adamant about destroying the warmongers. And that's not how it works. When you do, there's a wonderful cartoon that somebody did, and it shows somebody sitting on the bow of a ship, and the rest of the ship's gone, and then it shows the ship that they're firing on, and it's sinking, and the two guys standing on the bow who are about to go down say, "We won, we won."
Yeah.
Right. Not for long. And that's kind of where I see us as a society. We're not paying attention to that. We both need good boats to float, and that's how we're going to make the world stronger. Imagine the world we could have if everybody could be educated and healthy and functioning at their peak. Wow, what a wonderful world we could have. We could have it. We'd probably solve a lot of the medical issues. There wouldn't be a lack of jobs. There'd be an abundance of jobs because people would be operating at peak capacity, peak creativity, peak productivity, all of those things. And the world could be if we would just get together and do it. And that takes treating everybody as a human being. That's the bottom line. We need to start recognizing that we are. It's the question that Cain and Abel in that story. Right? Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer obviously is yes, you are. Not in the sense of controlling, but in the sense of do no harm.
And that's an important distinction.
Yeah. We are responsible for the harm that we either cause or allow to happen. And that's a hard thing. There was a case not that many years ago in Florida where two kids videoed a guy drowning instead of
helping. Yes,
instead of helping.
Yeah.
And I recognize it. No, I'm not suggesting that they should have jumped in and wrestled an alligator kind of thing, do it safely. But the very least they could have done is call 911. Right. And might it not have saved the person? Yeah, it might not have. But just sitting there and videoing it, not okay.
It's important to try.
Right. You got to do what you can. And yes, you do need to stay safe. We don't need to create additional emergencies. but there are safe ways to help another human being. And there does need to be a balance, and some of them are judgment calls, and it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy stuff. This is difficult, challenging pieces. But the question always is, when you've got a conflict in and of itself is not Huxley meets Orwell. Okay. Just the comment. It's
on the Facebook page.
yeah, on the
comment, but
Facebook.
yeah, right.
Thank you, Al. It's very, very possible to create a situation where people can thrive, where we can benefit one from the other, and not benefit from putting people down in order to do it. It's very doable. We've done it as a species before, and we can do it again. It's not beyond our reach. And in fact, I'm going to say that Scripture says that it's not over the mountain, it's not across the sea. It's within your hands, it's within reach. We all can do more in that direction. We can help each other as human beings, and we can be human beings. And that's my request. The king asks Esther, "What's your request?" And my request is that we treat each other like human beings. We treat each other as we would want to be treated, or in the Jewish way of saying is, don't do to somebody what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Everybody's got a golden rule. And I actually like the Jewish one, because not doing something that you would find distasteful to me is actually bigger than do to somebody what you would want them to do, because that can be corrupted actually more easily. But don't do what you wouldn't want somebody to do. And the Buddha said it, and so many others have said it. Like Confucius said it. It's throughout religions is this golden rule that human beings need to be treated like human beings. And we also need to have respect for every living thing. Every living thing.
An important note to end on. Thank you.
It
This
is,
has been quite a program.
Yeah.
Ask a Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. Third Friday, Shabbat dinner tonight, and next Friday is dress up night. We'll be celebrating Purim on Friday night as well. Purim coming next week.